Nothing was broken, and that was the first sign this was not an ordinary crime. At 3:47 a.m. on November 13, 1998, inside a McDonald's in Charlotte, North Carolina, a perfect circular hole appeared in the ceiling, cut clean through metal with surgical precision. No shattered glass, no forced door, no alarm. Below the opening ceiling, tiles were stacked neatly, almost politely, and a rope hung down into the empty restaurant like a question mark. When the morning manager arrived at 5:30 a.m., everything looked exactly the way she had left it the night before: registers closed, tables, wiped chairs, stacked. Then she noticed the office door was open. She always locked it. Inside, the safe stood open and completely empty. Police found no fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses, and no usable security footage, only that immaculate hole in the roof. Whoever did this knew where the cameras were, knew the timing between closing and opening, knew exactly where the safe was, and knew how long they could stay without being seen. This was not desperation. This was rehearsal. And it wasn't an accident, because over the next 18 months, that same hole would appear again and again, 43 times across 5 states, always identical, always silent, always perfect. The FBI would give the man responsible a nickname, Roofman, a ghost who didn't smash his way in but descended from above. And what no one understood yet, what would turn this case from impressive to legendary, was that Roofman wasn't just breaking in and leaving. He was hiding inside, waiting, watching, living in the spaces no one thought to look. What made Roofman terrifying wasn't the theft itself, but the calm, repeatable system behind it. A system that treated crime not as an emotional act, but as a process to be optimized. Over and over again across 5 states and dozens of locations, the pattern held with mechanical consistency. The entry always happened after closing, when the building exhaled into emptiness and routine replaced vigilance. A precise cut through the roof, never rushed, never sloppy, followed by hours of stillness. Roofman didn't break in and run, he settled in. He waited in darkness sometimes for 6 or 7 hours, breathing slowly, unmoving, listening to the building cycle through silence. When the morning shift arrived, tired and unguarded, he appeared not with chaos, but with control. His weapon was visible, but rarely raised. His voice was steady, almost courteous. He didn't scream. He didn't threaten. He issued instructions the way someone gives directions, and people followed them, because panic had nowhere to go. Employees were led into the walk-in freezer, a space that looked dangerous, but wasn't a calculated choice that neutralized resistance without crossing into cruelty. 10 minutes. Always 10. He knew how long the freezer could be used safely. He knew how long it took managers to reach the office. He knew the combination would be written down somewhere, because people always do that, when repetition breeds complacency. He took only cash, never personal belongings, never excess, never more than necessary. Average take a little over $4,000. Average time inside 11 minutes. To Roofman, this wasn't theft fueled by need or rage. It was execution. A sequence refined through repetition until there was no wasted movement, no unnecessary risk. Each successful robbery reinforced the illusion that the system was perfect, that nothing needed to change. But perfection carries its own danger. The more efficient the process became, the more it detached the act from consequence, from fear, from humanity. For the employees, it was a moment of frozen terror that lingered for years. For Roofman, it was another clean run, another confirmation that discipline beats force and patience beats luck. And with every flawless repetition, something subtle but critical shifted. The crime stopped feeling like survival and started feeling like mastery. The system no longer served him. He served the system. And once a person begins trusting a system more than their own limits, escalation is no longer a question of if, but when. By the time local police departments realized they were not dealing with isolated incidents, but a single repeating intelligence behind them, the case had already outgrown any one jurisdiction. Files were compared, photos pinned side-by-side, timelines stacked until a pattern emerged so clean it was unsettling. This was not a criminal improvising under pressure. This was someone who planned weeks, sometimes months ahead, and then executed without deviation. When the FBI stepped in, they weren't looking for a suspect so much as trying to understand a philosophy. They gave the unknown intruder a name, Roofman, not because it humanized him, but because it made him easier to talk about in rooms filled with maps, charts, and sleepless agents. Behavioral analysts dissected every detail the patients required to remain hidden overnight. The comfort with heights, the precision of the cuts, the refusal to harm employees even when armed. The profile pointed in one direction, again and again, military training, likely airborne, someone conditioned to wait, to observe, to move only when the odds were mathematically in their favor. And yet, for all the sophistication of the analysis, the investigation stalled at the same invisible wall. No fingerprints, no DNA, no usable surveillance footage. Every robbery happened in places designed to feel interchangeable, identical layouts scattered across the American landscape like copy-paste architecture, giving Roofman infinite options and law enforcement infinite uncertainty. Stakeouts were set, rooftop sensors installed, cameras repositioned. And each time the system adapted, Roofman adapted faster, shifting to smaller towns, quieter locations, places where attention thinned and routine thickened. The more the FBI learned, the more unsettling the realization became. They were building a near-perfect psychological portrait of a man who did not yet exist on paper. No criminal history, no known alias, no record that matched the profile tightly enough to matter. He was a presence without a body, a method without a name. And that absence created its own kind of pressure, the kind that seeps into late-night briefings and empty coffee cups, because every passing morning meant another store could open its doors to find the same hole in the ceiling, and no one could say where it would happen next. The system had worked too well for too long, and that success planted the seed of its own destruction. By the spring of 2000, Roofman had crossed an invisible threshold where repetition no longer brought tension, only confidence, and confidence slowly eroded caution. On May 20th in Gastonia, North Carolina, he made a decision that broke his own rules. 2 robberies in one morning, 2 nearly identical targets less than 20 miles apart. On paper, it made sense. Same layout, same timing, double the reward. But psychologically, it marked a shift from discipline to entitlement. The first robbery unfolded exactly as it always had, smooth and silent, another confirmation that nothing could touch him. The second was different. As he directed employees toward the freezer, one person didn't freeze, didn't comply, didn't wait for permission. They ran. A silent alarm was triggered, unheard and unseen, already counting down the end of the run. Roofman continued the routine, unaware that the clock had changed. When he exited the restaurant, it was daylight, the world awake in a way it had never been during his escapes. Police cruisers were already converging. He abandoned the car and ran, cutting through yards and fences with the speed drilled into him years earlier. But this was no longer a controlled environment. This was suburbia at dawn, neighbors outside cars on the road radios crackling with updates. At 6:23 a.m., the chase collapsed into a backyard confrontation. Weapons raised, commands shouted. Roofman dropped his rifle and lifted his hands, the moment stretching long enough to strip the myth from the man. For the first time, there was no ceiling to hide behind, no system to disappear into. There was only a name, a face, and the sudden realization that perfection doesn't fail loudly. It fails in a single, irreversible moment of excess. Prison was supposed to be the end of the story, the place where motion stopped and consequences finally caught up. But for Jeffrey Manchester, it became something else entirely, a classroom disguised as confinement. Sentenced to 45 years, he entered the system quietly, without resistance, without theatrics, presenting himself as exactly what the evaluations described: a cooperative, nonviolent inmate who followed rules and adapted well. Guards saw compliance, administrators saw stability. What they didn't see was attention. Manchester didn't push against the walls, he studied the seams. He learned the rhythms of the facility the way he once learned McDonald's layouts, cataloging shift changes, noting which guards rushed inspections and which followed checklists to the letter. He requested work in the metal shop, a supervised environment that granted access to tools, materials, and more importantly, trust. Over months and then years, trust accumulated quietly. He became reliable, then indispensable, handling inventories, assisting with training, blending into the machinery of the prison, until his presence felt routine, and routine, once normalized, becomes invisible. From that vantage point, patterns emerged. Laundry trucks arrived on the same days at the same times. Food deliveries followed fixed schedules. Security checks beneath vehicles relied on quick mirror sweeps designed to spot human shapes, not engineered absences. Manchester noticed the difference between looking and seeing. He began preparing not with urgency, but with patience, gathering materials, slowly assembling nothing in one place, leaving no single act that could be labeled suspicious. The plan itself was deceptively simple and brutally unforgiving, a low-profile platform attached to a truck's undercarriage painted black designed to disappear into shadow. If it failed, he would be crushed. If discovered, he would be shot. There was no margin for error, and no backup plan, only the same calculated risk he had taken his entire life, now compressed into minutes beneath a moving vehicle. On June 15, 2004, as the laundry truck rolled through 2 security checkpoints and onto the road beyond the prison gates, the institution remained convinced it had done its job. It would be hours before anyone realized that confinement had not broken him. It had simply given him time. Freedom didn't erase Jeffrey Manchester's problems. It stripped away the excuses and left him alone with himself. When he dropped from the underside of the truck at a red light miles from the prison, he had no money, no identification, no plan that extended beyond the next hour. Panic would have been understandable. Instead, habit took over. He did what he had always done. Best he observed, calculated, and moved toward the spaces other people ignored. Rather than disappearing into the wilderness, he vanished into America's retail sprawl, into buildings designed to be brightly lit and heavily trafficked places no one imagines as hiding spots. After hours, he cut into the roof of a Toys R Us with the same quiet precision he had practiced dozens of times before, and didn't steal $1. He stayed. During business hours, he became part of the architecture, frozen behind stacked boxes, breathing shallowly as employees walked past. At night, the store transformed into a private world, where he rode bicycles down empty aisles, ate baby food scavenged from the shelves, and slept wrapped in blankets meant for display. Weeks passed, then months, and the routine hardened into something almost domestic. When the store grew busier and risk increased, he adapted again, slipping into an abandoned Circuit City next door, a hollow shell forgotten by commerce. Under a staircase, he built a hidden apartment complete with a mattress, electricity, a television, and stolen DVDs. In that sealed pocket of space, he watched movies about con men and fugitives, the irony so sharp it bordered on self-awareness. By day, he re-entered society under a different name, attending church, volunteering, forming relationships, presenting himself as stable, generous, ordinary. By night, he returned to his hidden rooms, a ghost living inside systems that functioned without ever noticing him. It was a double life balanced on precision and restraint, and for a time it worked so well, it felt sustainable. But the same force that had undone him before was quietly returning. Survival was no longer enough. Comfort crept in. Familiarity replaced fear. And somewhere between the fluorescent aisles and the secret apartment, the line between hiding and belonging began to blur, setting the stage for the mistake that would close the loop for good. The end didn't arrive with chaos or gunfire. It arrived the same way everything else in Jeffrey Manchester's life had, through repetition. By December of 2004, the routines that once kept him invisible had begun to feel familiar, even comfortable, and familiarity dulled the edge that had kept him alive. Toys R Us, the store that had sheltered him for months, stopped feeling like a hiding place and started feeling like an opportunity. The registers were heavy after Christmas. The layout burned into his memory. The cameras mapped the blind spots known. He told himself this would be different, one final job, a clean exit, before the noise returned. On December 26th, he moved through the building with the same calm authority he always had, directing employees toward the back, controlling the space through confidence rather than force. But the environment had changed. More staff, more movement, less predictability. 2 employees broke away and ran their footsteps, shattering the illusion of control he depended on. Police response was immediate, aggressive, unavoidable. Manchester fled not into the night but into the maze he had built for himself, slipping back toward the abandoned Circuit City, toward the room that had once felt invisible. This time the system didn't protect him. Officers traced the connections between buildings, followed the logic he had trusted for too long, and found the hidden apartment under the staircase mattress, food clothes, and a television still warm from use. The discovery stripped away the final layer of myth. Weeks later, a tip led police to Manchester, walking down a residential street carrying groceries like any other man. He ran, but the years of tension had taken their toll. The chase ended quickly. When the handcuffs closed, it felt less like a capture than a conclusion. The loop had finally closed, not because he lost his skill, but because he believed he could outgrow his pattern without escaping it. What Jeffrey Manchester left behind was not just a long sentence or a sensational case file, but a quiet recalibration of how systems understand risk. In the years after his final capture, prisons across the country re-examined delivery protocols, undercarriage inspections, and the assumption that compliance equals safety. Retail chains reconsidered rooftop security access points and the false comfort of identical layouts. But the deeper legacy of the Roofman story reaches beyond policy changes. It forces an uncomfortable question about discipline without direction, about what happens when intelligence, patience, and structure are severed from purpose. Manchester was never reckless in the way popular culture imagines criminals to be. He was methodical, restrained, and deeply committed to process. That commitment allowed him to disappear repeatedly, but it also trapped him in a loop he could not break. Every escape attempt that followed his return to prison added years to his sentence, not because he posed a greater threat, but because he could not accept stillness. Psychologists would later describe his behavior as obsessive, an inability to tolerate containment, a compulsion to move even when movement guaranteed punishment. His story endures not because of the money he stole or the audacity of his escapes, but because it exposes a contradiction at the heart of modern systems. They are designed to manage disorder, not individuals who quietly master their rules. In the end, Jeffrey Manchester didn't lose because he lacked skill. He lost because freedom, once pursued without an internal stopping point, becomes another kind of prison, one that no wall can contain and no escape can resolve. Jeffrey Manchester's story isn't just about crime or escape. It's a cautionary tale about discipline without direction and freedom without limits. Skill, patience, and intelligence can build extraordinary outcomes, but without purpose, they can just as easily construct a cage of repetition and self-destruction. In a system-driven world, the most dangerous failures aren't loud or chaotic. They're quiet, methodical, and overlooked until it's too late. If this story made you question how systems work and how people slip through them, take a moment to support deep investigative storytelling. Like the video, share it with someone who thinks differently, and subscribe for more true stories that explore not just what happened, but why it matters.